Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, today's conversation is going to be titled The Myth of the Teacher Shortage. And it's not a misspell, right? I didn't make a typo. It's actually true. There's no such thing as a teacher shortage. And everybody likes to spin this narrative in the media. Sometimes teachers themselves even spin this. But it's not true, right? There's no such thing as a teacher shortage. And it's one area of conversation that really hits home for me as somebody who struggled for 2 years to get into a position where you can make a really decent living as a teacher, away from the private schools and away from the charter schools. You're finally a nice, cushy public school role. If you want to get one of those, it's incredibly difficult. And I'm in the state of Ohio. And if you'll note there in the bottom left of this screen here, in this little graphic that I made, one of the first things that pops up when you type in teacher shortage, what states have the highest teacher shortage, you'll see that Ohio is one of them, right? And I thought to myself, well, if we have one of the highest teacher shortages, I can assure you nowhere else has this problem, because, I mean, in Ohio, it is ungodly competitive to get a teaching position, right? I mean, it's a rigged game half the time, and people are lying to these undergraduates. They're lying to everybody else when they say that there is a teacher shortage, right? They act as if there's, schools can't find teachers, but it's just not true. And I want to elaborate here with the story, right? So a few years ago, I was slated with giving a guest lecture at Cleveland State University, and it was for a professor that I'm friends with, and so I was able to get invited and come to speak to these little student teachers who were just about to go out into the job market, and they were just starting their student teaching. And I open up and I say, okay, well, all right, how many of you guys, I want you to raise your hands on this, how many of you guys, after 5 years of grinding and spending tens of thousands of dollars, do you want, and after passing the licensing exams, do you want to have a full-time teaching position with your own classroom? Well, inevitably, the entire class raises their hands. And you think, okay, well, that's awesome. Right? At least they want to do what they went to school for, right? So they all raise their hands. And you say, okay, well, statistically speaking, half of you guys aren't going to find a job in the field of education, right? So, wait a second. You can see the panic ensue, right? Everybody starts to freak out a little bit, but you can see the cocky arrogance of the people who thought that they had it in the bag, right? That there's going to be no problem finding a job because, hey, look, after all, there's a teacher shortage, ladies and gentlemen. And so, they start to freak out a little bit. And then I tell them, okay, well, you didn't listen to what I said, did you? Right? Those were people who were going to find a job in the field of education. That's a substitute teacher. That's a tutor. That's a paraprofessional. That has nothing to do with being an actual full-time teacher. And even worse than that, if you do become a full-time teacher, you're probably going to be stuck at a private school or a charter school where you're not going to make that much money. The job is going to be incredibly difficult. You're going to take a lot of shit, and you're not going to have as good of a time as you would if you were in the public schools. So I was, reckoning with this fact. I read some articles, and that's sort of how I came to that number. I believe it was a Guardian article, but don't quote me on that. I looked back to see if I could try to find it. I can't find it. So it's somewhere out there in the abyss of the internet. But these undergraduates, you can tell they were getting a little bit. They were getting terrified, right? And so I tell them everything they can do to try to help get themselves a position, moving on, after they graduate. And as somebody who was incredibly qualified as an undergraduate, look, I had my bachelor's degree. I had 2 majors, not one, history and social studies. I had a certificate, an undergraduate certificate, right? So an actual college certificate in American Studies. I had 5 years of corporate experience as a corporate recruiter and a corporate services specialist. I have honors programs, which are ungodly competitive to get into, and the people who go into those programs tend to have the same life outcomes as people who join the Ivy Leagues. I have, summa cum laude, super high GPA. I have peer-reviewed articles. I'm part of a million different honor societies, and I did what people told you need to do to be successful. That's what I did, right? Now, could I have maybe had a stronger resume or better answers to questions? Sure. I'm not denying that, right? But what I am saying is I was towards the top of the pack as somebody who was an undergraduate looking to find themselves a teaching position. And so, I get to start looking for a job after I'm finishing up my student teaching at Cleveland State University. I was teaching at a school in Cleveland at the time, and it was half online, like half hybrid. It was right around the time of COVID, and I would look. I didn't think I had to take student teaching serious at all, right? To me, it was like, okay, there's a teacher shortage. Why should I care one bit about this, right? I'm gonna go work at one of the best performing schools in Ohio, and there's gonna be no issues. I'm gonna live a nice, comfortable life, making good money and having great students, right? Well, I get into the job search, and right away I start looking for jobs, and I realized there's nothing. And I was like, it hit me. It hit me like a truck, and I realized right away, like, oh, wait a minute, like I actually might not find anything. And like it struck me there, because as a student, you're not looking for these roles, and you don't really understand what you're getting yourself into, and that was certainly me. That is certainly applied. And so it really hit me. It hit me hard. And I realized right away that there was way, way, way more people applying for positions than there are actually positions. And so let me give you an example, right? Now, you guys can take the time to guess. Obviously, this is not a live audience, but how many public school teaching positions do you think there are in Northeast Ohio, which is, a relatively populated area, right? Within let's say within a 2-hour diameter, right? So Cleveland's in the middle, right? You go 1 hour in each direction of Cleveland, right? How many teaching positions do you think there are? Maybe some of you guys aren't familiar with the geography, but there's a lot of cities. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of schools, right? In this area, right? And how many positions will there be for middle school and high school? Because people's licenses are usually in 7 through 12. Well, there's about 15 public school teaching positions. You're like, 15 positions. Did I hear that correct? Right? Yes, you heard that correct. There's only about 15 positions, right? In all that space with hundreds of schools, there's only about 15 public school positions that are open every single year, right? Maybe if you're lucky, it'll go up to 20, right? But that's still not a lot of positions. And you say, okay, well, look, I'm a pretty qualified individual. I got a good background. I have good answers. Do I stand a chance? And you say, okay, well, how many people are applying? So take a guess. How many people do you think are applying for these 15 roles? The answer is about 300 to 400. Right? It's insane, right? So, if you are not the best at what you do, and even if you are the best at what you do, first of all, there's a really good shot you won't get hired, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. You don't stand a chance. And so, one of the things here is that there's alternative routes to trying to get yourself a full-time position. And hopefully through these alternative routes, you can maybe, if you're lucky, get a full-time role. But it's going to be by subjecting yourself to hardship for a couple years, right? And really just killing it and praying that you can get out of this slump that you're going to be in, right? And one of the alternative routes is going to be either a charter school teacher or a private school teacher, right? So 2 alternative routes there. Now, what's the difference between a charter school, a private school, and a public school? Well, a private school, as you know, is all privately funded. Now, there are voucher programs out there which require the private schools to have a little bit of more regulation from the state. Right? They got to abide by certain compliance articles and whatnot if they want to accept those vouchers. And a lot of places do this, right? Ohio does it, but I'm pretty sure every state does this, right? It's one of the big things that Trump expanded was the use of voucher programs under Betsy DeVos, who was the former Secretary of Education. Well, I'm vehemently against that, by the way, but that's what happened. And so you say, okay, well, these private schools, what do they pay, right? They got great students, right? Oftentimes the students there, they're well behaved, and if they're not, they just get kicked out because other parents aren't going to put up with it because they're paying a lot of money. You say, okay, well, how much are they paying teachers? Maybe high 20,000s. High 20,000s? You can't live off of high 20,000s, right? So maybe you get paid, 28, 29K, 30K, probably 35K at the max if you're like the top tier echelon of private schools, right? But it's terrible. The pay is garbage. And you say, okay, well, what about if you go to like a charter school? And first of all, what is a charter school, right? Because they don't really tell you this when you're going to school for education, because everybody thinks they're getting a nice public school role. Nobody even really talks about charter schools, and even if they know what they are, they don't really understand what it is that they do or how it is that they operate. And so a charter school is essentially a school where you have this ambitious individual who pitches their idea of a school to these people called sponsors at the state level. These sponsors decide whether or not they want to accept your plan or whatnot, to allow you the right to start a school and form a school board as a non-profit. And then maybe that school board elects you as somebody who can get paid a lot of money to run some of these schools, but you're going to be in charge of like everything yourself, right? Recruiting, you're going to be in charge of the academics, you're going to be in charge of the financials, and you can't just go to the bank to start these schools, right? Because you have to, it's a nonprofit, like you usually have to put up all of your own money to start these, usually. I mean, there's workarounds, but that's usually how it works. And so essentially what it is, even though it's not technically a privately run business, it essentially is a privately run business through some workarounds. And so it tends to be a private corporation who starts these management companies, and they tend to start up these school boards, which in turn pay the management companies. So therefore, it's essentially a private business getting public funds to teach your kids, right? So that's really what a charter school is. And they pay better than the private schools. And there's probably more charter school jobs than there are private school jobs, which is, shocking, but that's probably true. And with the charter schools, one of the really weird things about them is that they're probably going to actually pay more than the public schools for the first couple years of a teacher's career. But after the first couple years, they definitely do not pay more than the public schools do, right? And so the whole goal is that maybe you would start at a charter school, and then you would work your way into a public school. Now, these public schools are all publicly funded, right? So they get all their money from the government, and they teach their students. Everyone knows what a public school is, but they pay the most. They got the best benefits. You're going to be teaching less classes than you would be at a private or charter school. You're going to have less responsibility. You're going to probably deal with politics a little bit more, but you are going to have less to do, and you're going to get paid a lot more for it. You're going to have better benefits in virtually every single capacity, and you're also going to have a lot of protections because you're going to be in a teachers union. Right, so you're gonna have it makes a lot of sense. So over time, you're gonna get these guaranteed raises through teacher salary schedules. And so if you want to actually be a teacher, you have to become a public school teacher. Otherwise, it's never worth it. I mean, maybe if you have some spouse or something to support you, but unless that's the case, you have to get into a public school because they pay enough money so that way you can survive and live. And people say, well, teachers don't go in it for the money. It's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And if you don't go into it for the money, you're an idiot because you should go into it for the money. So unless you're like some monk or something who wants to live on the street, you probably should be thinking about money. And so money is very important, and teachers should get more of it. Personally, if I were in charge of things, I would say that teacher unions around the country, or in particular the biggest teacher union, the NEA, I would encourage every teacher in the country to go on strike. And I'd say I'd demand a minimum of like $75,000 a year or something crazy like that, right? Because like what? You're not gonna. It's like, you don't want to do that? Okay, congratulations. I'll tank your whole economy. Yeah, what are you gonna do about it, right? Make the concessions. It's like the most important job you can have, right? One of the most important jobs, right? Obviously, there's other very important jobs out there, but education's up there, right? And you'd think that we'd be funding it more, but we don't. And so, anyways, just to compete for these jobs is ungodly competitive, right? It's ungodly competitive. Like I said, you're gonna have 15 teaching positions and you're gonna have a few hundred applicants, and this is, again, you can see the AI overview here. Oh, it says Ohio is one of the worst states, right, for a teacher shortage. It's like, so if we have one of the worst teacher shortages, I mean, I can't even imagine what the others are, because that doesn't exist in Ohio. It's not a real thing, right? And like, I've seen teachers, they struggle for years to get a teaching position, like in the public schools. They just can't do it. And so what happens is they get stuck as substitutes, or maybe they leave the field. Maybe they get stuck as like a para, they leave the field. Maybe they get stuck as like a tutor, they're going to leave the field because they don't make anything, right? Or maybe they get stuck at like a private or charter school, and they'll stick it out as long as they can, but eventually they'll probably just leave the field because it's just not worth it to stay long term, right? So if we have one of the worst teacher shortages, and we certainly do not have one, right? I can't even imagine what it's like in these other states. I mean, what is there, 1,000 applicants for positions? I know people are talking about this all the time online. I see it every day, and it's one of the things that I'm most passionate about, right? It's like the idea that these companies, like, people want to work, people want jobs, right? But these companies are not hiring people at all in the least, and they go around and say, well, nobody wants to work for us. Oh my God, we can't find anybody who wants to work. It's like, that's such a lie. It's a lie, and it's a lie that everybody knows is true, and there's very little we can do about it, right? I mean, most positions, right? You post an actual job on LinkedIn, you post a job on Indeed, you post it on Google Jobs, like just on your website, anywhere. You're going to get hundreds of applicants overnight, and if you don't, or maybe in the first week, but if you don't, like, you're probably doing something wrong, because people are out there and they want to find jobs. Now, I'm not saying there's not exceptions to the rules. Sure, right? You're in like rural Wyoming. I'm sure there's not a teacher shortage, right? I'm sure it's pretty tough to find people, right? But in like 99% of places, right, there is a teacher shortage, right? And it's I mean, there's not a teacher shortage is what I'm saying. There's not a teacher shortage. My bad. I slurred my words there. I made a gaffe. I made a gaffe there, right? So it's just not a thing. And so another thing that I want to talk about here is this idea that like the news media has somehow latched onto this, and I don't really understand why. So, and I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about this in the comments if you're still listening. You can see, like, it's just a quick screenshot, right? In the first 2 seconds, you just type in teacher shortage, just hit enter, right? You can see there's like a bajillion articles out there about how all these countries are struggling with teacher shortages. Teachers are under the stress amid the shortage of mental health resources. Shortage of teachers leads to districts to hire industry pros. It's like, nobody's doing this, dude. Like, where is this coming from? And like, even like in Ohio, for example, it's hilarious because the governor doesn't even know his own state. Like, he says that there's a teacher shortage, and so they're looking at alternative licensure routes. It's like, dude, what teacher shortage, man? Like, I can like fill every role in Ohio overnight just with the people that I know because there's just that few jobs. I mean, it's ridiculous, and people have latched onto this for so long, and it makes no sense to me. And so one of the only things that I can think of is that these news outlets it's either maybe to suppress teacher pay or something, right? The idea there's already so many of them that, like, look, they're going to be willing to take less because they just all enjoy it so much, and that if you can get one of those roles, you're going to be so fulfilled, and so therefore we can pay teachers less. And so maybe if we keep that popular in the media, maybe that's something that can have an impact in terms of legislation to keep teachers from getting the wages that they deserve. And that's like the only thing that I can think of, because I can't understand why they would go with these lies for so long. It doesn't make sense to me. And I feel like people might also get confused on this, which is the idea that teachers do leave the profession at alarming rates. That's true. Teachers do leave the profession sometimes, right? But I think one of the things that they don't really tell you is that they're not leaving these cushy public school roles. Right? Those teachers stay into those roles for 35 years and they never leave. Those jobs are filled forever. They're never getting open again until they retire. And so I think where you might see some of that flight of teachers tends to be a little bit more in some of the high stress areas, right? So places where there's very rough behaviors, very low academic performance. You're dealing with just craziness on a daily basis. You probably see a little bit more flight there. Not a lot, but I think you're going to see a little bit more flight there. In addition to that, it's going to be in the charter schools and the private schools, which just have horrendous working conditions. And that's where you're going to see the main flight of teachers. But it's still not as big of a problem as people make it out to be, because, let's say there's 15, maybe 20 public school teaching positions within that 2-hour diameter over hundreds of schools. You say, okay, well, like, is that something that, like, can let me abandon that thought, actually. I'm going to abandon that thought, right? But it's crazy nonetheless, and it's something that nobody's talking about. And so another thing that I want to mention here is just like, this idea that getting a teaching position is like, first of all, it's not easy in the sense that there's so much competition for the roles, but you also have to perform at such a high level for so long to get these roles. And so if you're going to interview to be a teacher, it's like, how many rounds do you think there are? There's about like 3. There's like roughly 3 rounds of interviews. You're usually probably going to have a screening over the phone. And then in addition to that, they're going to have a first round interview, a second round interview. Some places might even have a third round after that, right? So in total, you might have 3 to 4 interviews, right? And it's crazy, right? And these are people grilling you about X, Y, and Z. And if you're not on your game, if you're not the best at what you do, so there's a few ways that you can get these roles, right? So one is that you have to be the best at what you do. Or you have to come in super prepared. Like when I go into a job interview for whatever it may be, one of the things that I do is I watch every single board meeting. I read their collective bargaining agreements. I'm going to read their COVID plans. I'm going to read their strategic plans. I'm going to read their school report cards. I'm going to read every news article within the past year. I'm going to go online. I'm going to look at their Wikipedia. I'm going to look at just every little thing that I could possibly, their social media, all of their websites, their student handbook, like codes of conduct, like just every little thing that you can think of, I'm going to look at, and I'm going to try to have as much information as I possibly can to tie in my background, expertise, and skills to how I can benefit that school. And, like that only gives you a slight edge, right? It's not like I can go into an interview and just immediately get the role, even though somebody like me probably could, right? Like I've done a lot, and it's not me trying to like brag or anything. It's like, but like, dude, like I almost have a doctorate in education, right? I have multiple licenses, right? I mean, I have a 7 through 12 teaching license, for social studies, a 7 through 12 science license. I have a 4 through 9 principal license, a 5 through 12 principal license, an OTES license. I have a RESA mentor license. I have like every little thing, right? And it's like, it's crazy because like even someone with as much experience and license, I've founded like numerous committees, behavior programs. I've done it all, right? I've done it all. And I've had the highest state test scores in my school before. It's like that gets you above other candidates, but it's still not something that you can, and I'm pretty good at talking, right, as you can tell, but it's something that it puts you ahead of the pack, but it doesn't solidify you getting a job, right, because it's just so competitive, right? And so there's other people just like you, and if you think there's not, it's like you probably don't know what you're talking about. And even if you are the best, because somebody does have to be the best, it's like they still might not go to you for this reason, right? So the first one is being the best, but the second one is being good, being very good, but then also aligning with people ideologically, right? So what happens in the teaching field is they just straight up discriminate against you all the time. I mean, it's actually kind of insane how bad they discriminate against you. Like for ideology, like if you don't align with what the administration wants at a particular school, it's like, and just in terms of ideology, they don't want anything to do with you. And that could be something like, is like your stance on discipline, for example. Do you think kids can do wrong? Or is it the environment that's doing the kids wrong? Right? So if little Timmy goes and stabs little Jimmy in the hand with a pencil, is that little Timmy's fault? Or is that the system's fault that little Timmy decided to stab little Jimmy? Right? Whose fault is that? Right? And where you fall on that coin is going to determine whether or not you get a teaching position based on the interviewer. And it's crazy, but that's how it works. And, in the field of education, I mean, there's no attention to data. I mean, like, forget about that. Like, data is, like, the last thing that they care about. If it's, you actually have reasonable answers based on literature, based on, hard facts. They don't care about it in the least. In the least. The only way they care about it is if you align with them politically and ideologically. It's unfortunate, but that's the way that it is. So you can either be the best at what you do, right, or just align with them and align with them politically. And so I guess that's kind of like one thing lumped into two, we'll say, but it grouped into two different things. But that's how you can get a teaching role. And outside of that, you have to know somebody. So there's the common saying, it's who you know is where you go. And that's truer than ever because people will say networking. And I've always hated people who say networking. It's like have you ever tried to network before? Right? Like, what does that mean? And first of all, most people aren't receptive to you at all. And it's very hard to make connections with people and make them to the extent to which they're willing to stick their neck out for you. Because if you fail, right, after they recommended you for a job, they look like the idiot, not you. Yeah, you might look like an idiot too, but they're going to look like the idiot who recommended you, and they're not going to have as much sway. People aren't going to take them as seriously because they're going to think, okay, well, yeah, they just recommend idiots to go teach for us. It's like we're not going to listen to what they have to say anymore, and we're not going to respect them as much anymore. So why would they stick their neck out for you and somebody they just met? So the idea of networking is so stupid to me. And, I used to, in my younger years, I used to go out to these teacher job fairs, right? And I remember it was after my first year of teaching. I think it was it was my first year of teaching, actually. I was so miserable in the charter school world because I taught in one for 2 years, and I was fortunate enough to get out. But I remember I went to this job fair, and it was mainly for undergraduates. So I was probably the only one who really wasn't an undergraduate there. But I took a day off of work, and I went to this little fair, and there was people from all different types of schools there. There's a million different booths all around Northeast Ohio. There must have been like 50 to 100 schools there, right? And I was, I'd walk around and I would like ask if they had any social studies positions. None ever would. And so I'd go online after a while because I get sick of asking. And so at that point I'd be like, okay, well, like who actually has a social studies role? Because they're not going to take you serious if there's not a role there, right? I mean, like you can give them your resume, but if there's no job, there's no job. And again, people stay in these positions forever, so like there's no reason that they're going to talk with you, right? If there's no social studies position, there's not a social studies position, right? And so you're like, God, right? It was terrible. It was horrible. And so I would go into these job fairs and I'd look at, well, what schools had positions open. And it'd only be like usually like maybe 2 or 3 at this point, right? Because it was earlier in the year, right? Because these job fairs usually occur around like May, and like schools don't even start to hire until June to July, And so maybe if you get in this job fair at like April to May, you're not there. First of all, there's no positions at all, like to begin with, let alone at that time in the year, right? Because teachers usually don't put in their letter intents to retire until the end of the school year, because they're like, well, maybe I hold it out a little longer, I get a little bit more on my pension. I can stick it out another year. I can just take a lot of PTO that last year because I got 100 days saved in my sick bank. And so you could have people who want to work, and but it doesn't matter, right? Because if there's no job, there's no job. And I would look, and I'd go to the few places where there were, and I remember so vividly, I was walking around, and there was all these little undergraduate student teachers, and they were all so happy to be there, and they all thought they were going to get like the best jobs imaginable. And what they would do is they would set up these like pre-screening, like it was like a pre-interview to like a screening interview at these little job fairs, and it'd be like 10-15-minute slots that you would sign up for, and these would happen 5-6 hours later in the day. So it was like an all-day event type thing, but you went there in the morning, you checked out the booths, then you would assign your interviews, right? So there's only like a couple hours to where you'd walk around, and then after that it was reserved solely for interviews. And there was like a big giant conference room you'd wait around. There's a million chairs, there's like a little food and whatnot you could get. And I remember walking by vividly, I'll never forget this. There was these little groups of student teachers, and they were like, hee 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 hee. They're like, oh God, this is gonna be so awesome. We're gonna work in the same school together and have such a fun time this next school year. And I just couldn't help but feeling like, I just felt like angry at it almost, or not angry. I felt like pity. I felt pity on them because they have no idea what they got themselves into. They spent all this money, all this time, busting their ass to try to get these roles, and to try to get that degree, and to try to get this license, and it's gonna take them nowhere. And it was horrible to see. And I was it's really terrible. But I was one of these people who was there on a mission. I was on a mission, and I was able to find one place that had a social studies role open. So I set up like the pre-interview to the screening interview, and I just realized, I was like, I'm not gonna wait 5 or 6 hours. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm not subjecting myself to this. I'm like, I'm just gonna leave and devote my talents elsewhere. Maybe give them a call later. I'm like, but it was so painful to like have to go through that experience, and like everybody was so unaware. And so this is how I know that like the young kids, they don't know what they're getting themselves into in the least. And these job fairs, like the idea of networking, it's not happening, dude. Like it's straight up not happening. Now people can argue that and say, well, networking's easy. It's like, but no, it's not, dude. Like even in a place that was designed for networking, it's just not going to happen. You could say, okay, well, yeah, what if you stayed for that? It's like, well, first of all, it was like for like the worst school district in Northeast Ohio, and so like even if I did, it wasn't necessarily a place that I really wanted to be honest with you. And even if I did go into that little pre-screening, what you have to remember is that it's only if they really, really, really like you will they even give you the time of day to maybe set up a screening interview. So these job fairs, what they were is they were like a lie almost, right? Again, that's why I've been saying it's like a pre-interview to the screening interview. Oftentimes it was just for practice, which is fine because the teachers do need practice in interviewing questions, because most of the time they're not prepared. I certainly wasn't prepared when I first started interviewing. But it's like a waste of time almost, right? Because oftentimes, they got other people in mind, and they don't want to hire a young teacher who knows nothing. They'd rather hire somebody with a few years of experience under their belt who actually they're seasoned a little bit. They've seen a couple tours, right? And, it sounds weird. And so they do like young teachers, but, if you're not a young teacher who's fully prepared, which you won't be as a young teacher because you don't have the experience yet, you're kind of doomed. And I'm not one of those people who believes too much in this notion that you have to have 1 million years of experience and be fully vetted in the experience. Like, oh, you need 5 years, 10 years experience. It's like, that's the stupidest thing ever, right? Like, you're going to learn the job within like 2 to 3 years maximum. And if you haven't learned the job, fully in its full capacity after 2 to 3 years, it's like there's probably something wrong with you, right? Like you should know what you have to do, how to do it, and be very good at what you do after 3 years. And I'm sorry if you don't, sue me, man. I don't know, right? Like to me, I always look at experience as kind of like a participation trophy. It's like, congratulations, you taught somewhere for 10 years. So what? Like, what do you want, a cookie? Like, dude, like, what did you do in those 10 years that made you stand out from all the other candidates? That's what I want to know, right? So were you founding clubs, committees, different programs? Did you have really good test scores? Did you get farther your education? What are you doing? Did you get extra licenses? Oh, no? You didn't do that? You just taught for 10 years? Yeah. See what I mean here? Like, it doesn't really make much sense. And so, I could rant about that all day, and that's probably a whole other conversation, right? But, I guess to conclude this here is, my advice is probably that, if you're a young teacher, right, and you really want to get a teaching position, what you should do is you should be checking every single day. And I mean every day. And it's not like, I'm going to take the weekend off, or I'm going to, I'll check every other day. It's like, no, I mean, like, you actually check every single day, multiple times a day. Right? The second you wake up, you check for jobs. In the middle of the day, you check for jobs. At the end of the day, you check for jobs, and you apply immediately. You want to be the first one, right? Because if there's 400 people applying, right? I mean, like your resume is going to, what do you want to be on, you want to be the last person they look at? No, you want to be one of the first people, because unfortunate it is, these hiring managers, they simply do not care one bit about scrolling through all those resumes. And first of all, they won't do that anyways, because there's usually application tracking systems out there which will throw your resume in the trash immediately based on certain keywords. Right? I was a corporate recruiter for 4 years, and I saw it. There'd be certain keywords that I would tag, and oftentimes the keywords are random. I was just listening to a guy who bought his own ATS the other day, and he was mentioning how these ATSs, they pick random keywords, and he said, this is a quote that he said, and it was hilarious to me. He said that these are artificial intelligences that they can't pick out a traffic light out of 9 squares, right? But then they can filter through resumes and find the best candidate. Like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I don't think it works that way. But so you're going to be dealing with that. You're going to be dealing with hiring managers who don't want to do their job. You're going to be dealing with nepotism. I'd probably say 70% of the jobs out there, it's going to somebody who knows somebody. And I'm not saying that you can't recommend someone for a position, or that maybe that person wouldn't be a really good fit. But, like, I'll tell you what, like, I'm not going to be a part of that system. Like, the only way I'm recommending somebody is if they're really good at what they do, and I've had a great experience with them. And even still, like, that would just be for the interview. Like, they have to do well, otherwise don't hire them, right? It's not fair to somebody who's actually a really good candidate. You have to avoid the nepotism. But nepotism is so rife. So if you don't know somebody in this field, it's like you're probably going to go nowhere. And it's very unfortunate. It's extremely unfortunate. You really do have to know somebody. And so I guess my advice would be really to network as much as you can. Really prepare everything. Read everything about districts before you go into an interview. Make sure you got good answers to every question, and really try to weave in things that you've done. They want some solid, concrete examples of ways in which you've made their school better, or made your school better. But I'd say networking is one thing. When you're a student teacher, it sounded so stupid, and it's very hard to network, right? But, it's not easy. But I'd say if you're a student teacher somewhere, talk to every single teacher at that school. And maybe it's a waste of time, because maybe there's not a role that's coming up here. But if there is a role and you've made friends with enough people, maybe when the time comes and there is a role, you'll be one of the first people at the top of the list. And, again, it's tough, too, because oftentimes there's what we call internal transfers, internal hires. And so they just hire from within. And so most of the time, even when there is a position, it just gets filled internally anyways. So most of the jobs that you see were jobs that weren't able to be filled internally by other people who were already in the school district. And so it's very unfortunate. It's not something that's going to be an easy pursuit. But, and I wouldn't recommend personally that most people even go into this field, right? Unless you're like very, very, very sure that that's what you want to do for the rest of your life, and that, or it's like a stepping stone to get somewhere else that you want to be, like an administrator or something. But, if you're not all in, and I mean all in, it's just a waste of time and money. Like, don't do it. Like, you're better off doing something else and trying to find a job elsewhere. It's not worth it in the least to try to become a teacher for most people. And so, look, I'm going to steer you away from the field. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm real. Like, I'm not, like, I have no incentive to lie here, right? Like, there's zero incentive. I'm not trying to be provocative. I'm not trying to scare you off unnecessarily. It's true. And, like, and that's the thing. It's like people say, okay, well, you're crazy for saying that, because, of course, everybody knows there's teacher shortage. It's like, but the problem is I'm not crazy. I've seen this firsthand, and I know countless people who've also seen this firsthand. They struggle to even get the most basic bare bones role that pays nothing in, like, a private school. And look, it's like, what do you want out of life, man? You really got to self-assess. So you got to do all you can, network, perfect your resume, answer all the questions that they want in the applications. And, it's a rigged game, but it's a game that you're going to have to play if you actually want to be part of this field. And I guess all I can say is wish you luck, and, hopefully I can answer any questions you may have in the comments, right? There's a lot of a lot of advice that obviously gets lost in like a video format. I can't think of everything off the top of my head. I can't necessarily look at what your resume says word for word or how it's formatted and structured, but I can give you advice as to like how you can best proceed. And one of the things that I tried to do is I did a lecture series a year and a half ago, and I'd recommend you take a look at it. It can't hurt. Look at student teaching in the job market in particular. Maybe it helps out a little bit. But look, it's on you, y'all. It's on you. And it is a failure in the system, in my opinion, because we could use a lot more teachers. And so if we have a shortage, I'd recommend, we could at least double up or something, have some aides in the classroom and pay them a lot of money, because it's a very tough job, like co-teachers or something. And it's maybe not for everywhere or everybody, right? But I mean, it at least helps out these teachers who went to school and helps out our kids, because oftentimes the classes are overpopulated, and that's a whole other problem. So, having said that, thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to follow me on social media, right? It really boosts my morale whenever I see a brand new subscriber. And so comment something nice, I'll comment back, and hopefully I can make another video in the future. So have a good one. Bye-bye.